There's something quite curious happening in our world. More and more people are walking around with this knowing feeling in their chest, this restless energy that seems to have no name. They call it anxiety, stress, depression. They run to doctors, they take pills, they try this therapy or that technique. But what if I told you that what you're experiencing isn't a sickness at all? What if this discomfort, this unease, is actually a sign that you're beginning to wake up? You see, we live in a society that has gone completely mad, though it doesn't know it. We've created a world where the natural rhythm of life has been replaced by the mechanical tick of clocks and the harsh fluorescent glare of office buildings. We've convinced ourselves that happiness means accumulating things, that success means climbing ladders that lead nowhere, that love means possessing another person like a beautiful object in our collection. And then we wonder why we feel anxious. But here's the thing, your anxiety isn't a bug in your system. It's a feature. It's your deepest wisdom trying to get your attention like a smoke detector going off, because there really is a fire. The fire is the absurdity of the life we've been told to live. Your anxiety is your soul's way of saying something is very, very wrong here. Think about it this way. If you were a fish and someone had convinced you that you belonged on dry land, wouldn't you feel anxious? You'd be gasping, struggling, feeling like something was fundamentally off. Everyone around you might say, just adapt, take some pills, think positive thoughts, but your body would know the truth. You belong in water. In the same way, human beings belong in a different kind of world than the one we've created. We belong in a world where we wake up when our bodies are rested, not when an alarm clock screams at us. Your anxiety is your inner wisdom recognizing that you're living in an aquarium when you were meant to swim in the ocean. Now, let me tell you something that might sound strange. The very fact that you feel anxious, that you feel disconnected, that you sense something is missing, this puts you ahead of most people because the majority of human beings have successfully numbed themselves to the madness. They've adapted so completely to the artificial world that they no longer feel the discomfort of living against their nature. They're like people who've been wearing shoes that are 3 sizes too small for so long that they've forgotten what it feels like to walk barefoot on grass. They think the constant ache is just part of life. They think that Sunday night dread, that Monday morning sickness, that feeling of being trapped in a life that doesn't fit. They think this is normal. But you're still sensitive enough to feel the pinched. You haven't been completely anesthetized by the routine. And this, my friend, is actually a gift, though it doesn't feel like one. You know what they call people who are sensitive to the toxins in the environment? Canaries. In the old coal mines, miners would take canaries down with them because these birds would react to dangerous gases long before humans could detect them. When the canary started showing signs of distress, it wasn't because the canary was sick. It was because the canary was healthy enough to sense the poison in the air. You are the canary in the coal mine of modern civilization. Your anxiety is not a personal failing. It's an appropriate response to an insane situation. You're not broken. The world is broken, and you're still sane enough to notice. But here's where it gets really interesting. Most people, when they feel this anxiety, this sense that something is wrong, they try to fix themselves. They think, I must be defective. I must need to adjust my attitude, change my thoughts, become more positive. They go to therapists who try to help them adapt better to a sick society. They take medications to dull their sensitivity. They busy themselves with distractions, hobbies, entertainment, anything to stop feeling the uncomfortable truth that's trying to surface. But what if the anxiety isn't something to be cured? What if it's something to be listened to? You see, there are 2 kinds of anxiety. There's the neurotic kind, which comes from our imagination, from worrying about things that haven't happened and probably never will. That's the anxiety that comes from living in your head, from mistaking your thoughts for reality, from believing every story your mind tells you about the future. But then there's what I call existential anxiety. There is a little particular way. This is dinner inside a me-do. There's now coming round yourselves your honest tap bow to their encounter. It's the anxiety of feeling connected to something infinite while living in a world that treats everything as finite and disposable. This second kind of anxiety, this existential anxiety, isn't a problem to be solved. It's a wake-up call to be heeded. Let me tell you what's really happening. When you feel anxious in our modern world, you're feeling the friction between your true nature and the false self you've been taught to be. You're feeling the conflict between the natural flow of life and the artificial structures we've built around it. Think of it like this. A river, when it flows naturally, moves with ease around rocks and through valleys. But when you lived with it, the serious way is clowner. The water becomes turbulent. It crashes against the walls. It creates pressure. It wants to return to its natural course. Your anxiety is the turbulence of your life force trying to flow naturally in an unnatural world. Now, most people feel this turbulence and think, I need stronger concrete. I need better dams. I need to control this river more effectively. So they try harder to fit into the system. They work longer hours. They buy more things. They follow more rules. They take more pills. They try to force themselves to be happy with a life that fundamentally goes against their grain. But what if instead of building stronger walls, you listen to what the river is trying to tell you? What if your anxiety is actually pointing you toward your freedom? Here's something that might surprise you. Integral lipstick and brain, as this old country is honest all to hams and nos, off some awful place it comes that you asked. I love his house in traditional societies, people who were unusually sensitive, who felt things more deeply than others, who seemed to be tuned into something beyond the ordinary world. These people weren't sent to psychiatrists. They were recognized as shamans, mystics, healers. Their sensitivity was seen as a gift, not a curse. They were the ones who could feel what others couldn't feel, see what others couldn't see. They were the bridges between the visible and invisible worlds. Their anxiety wasn't pathized. It was honored as a sign that they were in touch with the sacred. But we live in a culture that has no place for the sacred. We've created a world that's entirely secular, entirely material, entirely focused on the surface of things. And in such a world, anyone who feels the depth, who senses the mystery, who intuits that there's more to life than what meets the eye, well, they're going to feel anxious. They're going to feel like they don't belong, and they're right. They don't belong. At least not to this artificial world we've constructed. But here's the beautiful paradox. The very thing that makes you feel like an outsider in this crazy world is the same thing that connects you to something much larger and more real. Your sensitivity to the falsiness around you is also your sensitivity to the truth that lies beneath it. When you feel anxious, you're feeling the gap between what is and what could be. You're feeling the distance between the life you're living and the life you're meant to live. You're feeling the tension between the person you've been taught to be and the person you actually are. This gap, this distance, this tension, it's not comfortable, but it's also not meaningless. It's your compass pointing toward your authentic self. You know, I often think about children and how naturally they live until we train it out of them. A child doesn't worry about being productive. They don't feel guilty for playing, for laughing, for being curious about everything. They don't check their watch every 5 minutes or worry about whether they're making the best use of their time. A child lives in the present moment not because they've learned some advanced spiritual technique, but because that's where life actually happens. They cry when they're sad. They laugh when something's funny. They get excited about simple things like puddles and butterflies and cardboard boxes. But somewhere along the way, we teach them that this natural way of being is wrong. We teach them that life is serious business. We teach them to postpone joy, to work now so they can live later, to trade their presents for a future that may never come. And is it any wonder that as adults we feel anxious? We've been taught to live everywhere except where we actually are. Your anxiety is your inner child crying out, this isn't how it's supposed to be. This isn't living. This is just surviving. And that inner child is absolutely right. Now, I'm not suggesting that all anxiety is wonderful and that you should never seek help or support when you're struggling. There are times when anxiety becomes so overwhelming that it prevents you from functioning, and in those cases, professional help can be invaluable. But what I am suggesting is that before you try to eliminate your anxiety, you might want to listen to what it's trying to tell you. Because often anxiety is not the problem. It's the messenger pointing to the real problem. The real problem is that we've forgotten how to live. We've forgotten that work is supposed to be an expression of our creativity, not a sentence we serve to earn many. We've forgotten that relationships are supposed to be about connection and love, not about meeting each other's expectations. We've forgotten that our bodies are not machines to be optimized, but living systems that have their own wisdom. We've forgotten that we are not separate from nature, but part of it. We've forgotten that we are not isolated individuals competing against each other, but interconnected beings sharing the same air, the same water, the same planet. Your anxiety is your body's way of remembering what your mind has forgotten. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're at a party where everyone is pretending to have a wonderful time, but the music is too loud, the conversation is meaningless, and the whole atmosphere feels forced and artificial. You might feel anxious in such a situation, and everyone might tell you to just relax and enjoy yourself. But your anxiety would be appropriate. It would be your authentic self recognizing that this party isn't actually fun, that the joy is manufactured, that something essential is missing. Our entire civilization is like that party. We've created this elaborate show of prosperity and progress, but underneath it all, something essential is missing. We've lost touch with the simple joy of being alive. We've traded mystery for certainty, wonder for knowledge, presence for productivity. And those of us who feel anxious, we're the ones who haven't fully bought into the show. We're the ones who still remember somewhere deep in our bones what authentic living feels like. Our anxiety is our authenticity, refusing to be silenced. So this is why trying to cure your anxiety without addressing the underlying conditions that create it is like taking aspirin for a broken leg. The aspirin might dull the pain, but it doesn't heal the break. The break in this case is our disconnection from our true nature. The break is our alienation from the natural world. The break is our isolation from each other and from the sacred dimension of existence. Your anxiety is not just personal, it's also collective. You're feeling not just your own disconnection, but the disconnection of the entire human species from its source. We've created a world where the average person spends more time under artificial light than natural light, where we eat food that was grown thousands of miles away by people we'll never meet, where we work at jobs that produce things we don't understand for companies we don't care about, where we live in boxes stacked on top of other boxes surrounded by strangers we don't know. And then we wonder why we feel anxious, why we feel depressed, why we feel like something is missing. What's missing is life itself, real life. Not the imitation of life we've been sold, but the actual experience of being a living being on a living planet. But here's the hope in all of this. The very fact that you feel this anxiety, this restlessness, this sense that something is wrong means that your authentic self is still alive. It means you haven't been completely programmed. It means there's still a part of you that remembers what real living feels like. Your anxiety is like a homing device constantly pointing you back to Lun. But your true home isn't a place you can find on a map. It's a way of being. It's the state of consciousness where you're fully present, fully alive, fully yourself. And you can access this state anywhere, anytime. You don't need to change your entire life overnight. You don't need to move to a cabin in the woods or join a community. You just need to start listening to what your anxiety is telling you and begin to make small changes in the direction it's pointing. Maybe it's spending more time in nature. Maybe it's saying no to commitments that drain your energy. Maybe it's having more honest conversations with the people you love. Maybe it's finding work that feels meaningful. Maybe it's simply slowing down enough to taste your food, to feel your breath, to notice the sky. The path back to authenticity is different for everyone. But it always starts with the same step, paying attention to what is actually happening inside you right now, instead of trying to fix or change or improve it. Your anxiety is not your enemy. It's your friend, your guide, your inner compass. It's the part of you that still knows the difference between what's real and what's fake, between what nourishes your soul and what starves it. So the next time you feel anxious, instead of immediately trying to make it go away, try this. Sit with it for a moment. Feel it in your body. Ask it what it's trying to tell you. Listen to its message without judgment. You might discover that your anxiety is actually excitement in disguise. Excitement about the possibility of living differently. Excitement about the potential for a more authentic life. Excitement about reconnecting with your true self. Or you might discover that your anxiety is grief. Grief for the parts of yourself you've had to hide or deny. Grief for the natural world that's disappearing. Grief for the connections we've lost in our rush toward progress. Both excitement and grief are natural responses to waking up in a sleeping world. There are signs that you're becoming more conscious, more alive, more real. And in a world that often seems to be sleepwalking toward disaster, consciousness is exactly what we need. We need people who are awake, who can feel, who haven't numbed themselves to the beauty and the pain of existence. Your anxiety might be uncomfortable, but it's also evidence that you're still alive in ways that matter. It's proof that your soul hasn't given up on you, that your deepest self is still fighting for expression. So don't be so quick to empathize your discomfort with the status quo. Don't be so eager to adjust yourself to an unjust world. Your anxiety might just be your sanity trying to save you from going insane. The question isn't how to stop feeling anxious in a world that's lost its way. The question is how to use that anxiety as fuel for finding your way back to life. How to let it guide you toward what's real, what's true, what's alive. Because in the end, you're not anxious, you're awake. And the world desperately needs more people who are awake.